ready to begin? Hello. Welcome. Welcome everybody, here and there. I am very pleased and happy to introduce Sara Diamond, who's with us here annually since she is the adjunct professor in our department. Sara Diamond, for those that don't know, is the artistic director of media and visual arts at the Banff Media Center in Canada, and has recently been appointed as the research director at the Banff Media Center. She has developed the entire research framework of the entire Banff Center, and this was recently accepted, so we consider this a pretty large accomplishment coming from an artist. And Sara is well known for her large-scale collaborations. She is, to me, a kind of a networker extraordinaire. And whenever people say that I'm doing too much and I'm too overstretched, they say, "Look at Sara." And I suddenly seem like I don't do much. So, anyway, this is what she will be talking about, and I have some questions to her because doing large-scale collaborations is incredibly difficult when you are working as a media artist, because there's a conflict between how you retain the conceptual, aesthetic, and philosophical integrity and managing a lot of people who each in their own way, as they should, have an interest in that kind of project. So how do you communicate is probably the biggest issue, and it's not just technological, it's philosophical and cultural. And this is what she'll be talking about, how to inspire this collaboration, how it's why this is desirable, because many of us have actually asked ourselves, why am I doing this in the midst of it? And how 2 + 2 can equal more, far more than 4. That's basically what she will be talking about, and she will be doing this through showing some examples. The first example will be Horizon Zero, which is a recently launched online publication and commissioning site that she has developed and is the editor-in-chief for. Then she will share some of the latest version of the long-term projects that she's been developing called CodeZebra. The Habituation Cage and Fashion components will be what she's going to show us this time. And she will also describe the state of visualization software and talk about the experiences with time, space, and invention that were the key to the Habituation Cages and the early stages of costume and fashion design for CodeZebra. So we're all very looking forward to seeing the latest and how much a person can do in 1 year. Please welcome Sara Diamond.
Thanks, Victoria, and it's always wonderful to be here at UCLA. I had a really lovely day meeting with a number of students, and now my day tomorrow is quite full meeting with other students, so I'm looking forward to that. And we had a really exciting sort of first meeting at the Nanotechnologies lab here. Victoria and I went over and met with Jim, and we're looking at ways that some of the work that we're involved with at the Banff Center, which is beginning to look at nanotechnologies, we've done some work with biotech and culture and science, can in fact unfold over the next number of years together as institutions. So there's great promise there. This is a little bit of just the Banff New Media Institute. This is the environment that is the research center at Banff currently. The Banff New Media Institute combines a space where we have very intensive cross-disciplinary dialogues between scientists, artists, people in the commercial sector, computer scientists, designers, and all kinds of others, philosophers, social scientists at points in time. So we have this sort of dialogue space where we really develop ideas and projects, and I'll show you a couple of examples there. And then we actually co-produce both creative projects, and also we have had a sort of small-scale, reasonable research environment, starting with virtual reality research and a lot of work on 3D interactive web experiences, and then much more sort of physical computing interfaces with both installation and the network. And we're now at this point where our research is ramping up very dramatically and has really been framed a lot by notions of collaboration across art and science and mathematics and art, as well as a number of social science disciplines. So it's been a kind of incremental process, and I want to just talk a little bit about some of what I've learned within that context. I'm going to just, here for a moment, this is a sort of populist, in some ways, expression of why it's important for people to, be able to communicate with each other using networks, and why collaboration is kind of critical. And it sort of says that, in very simplistic terms, we're in a space of dramatic gap between the needs of humans and the kind of technology drivers that have sort of built the economy in the end of the last century, and then collapsed neatly at the beginning of this century and millennium, and that it might be valuable to try and look at the ways that we can align the sort of forces of human need and invention, which aren't always rational, but to put those together with technology development and drives, and where in fact the technology should be, in a sense, racing to catch up with human needs and imagination and creativity, as opposed to the other way around. So that's the sort of premise of the New Media Institute. And then the idea also is that the sort of notion of networked knowledge and technology, that in fact, if you create a networked environment, there is certainly a role for individual knowledge that's very, very deep. But when you begin to kind of amortize knowledge over the sort of discourse and practical creative space of networks, both physically within one site where you have different disciplines working together, and then within a kind of reasonable structure of a network, over distances, you can kind of amortize that. You can actually create effects that are far beyond what you imagined, as well as disaffection in some ways as well within that process. So that's sort of our premise. And the Banff Center where I work is this phenomenally cross-disciplinary artistic environment. There's 5 centers within the Banff Center. Every discipline is there. It's all there at a professional level. It's a sort of, it's a place where people come when they've been out in the world in their practice for a while and kind of come to refresh and make new work, and to really work in a very deep way individually but also collectively. So it already has that environment, and we've kind of introduced into that science and science collaborations, computer science collaborations, and as of this year, we now have something called BERS, which is the Banff International Research Station. It sounds like outer space, but it's basically a mathematics research center that is really, really high-end, and it's mathematicians from essentially North America and some Europeans and people coming from Japan and other countries who are there at Banff essentially attacking mathematical problems together, but we're starting to work with these math researchers who are quite out there. So it's an environment that really, in some ways, engenders this possibility for collaboration, and a lot of what my role there has been, my chosen role, in fact, because I've sort of thought, well, we should do this here, is to create these situations where we really sort of pull together these environments. So some of where that happens, as I mentioned, is actually, maybe I'll go to our current programs and just give you a taste of sort of where we're going this year. We have some very pragmatic workshops that kind of bring the ideas into reality. We do a lot of fast prototyping. But our summits, which are these research environments where people come together and really have a chance to, in a very facilitated way, exchange their practice and come up with new ideas. I'll just give you, this one is coming up next, and so it's kind of probably interesting to consider it as we're talking about this. Oops, apply online. You probably don't want to know how to do that. But this is a research retreat that's essentially looking at the whole problem of collaboration. And the question I'm sort of asking people here, and through the research retreat, we're actually going to be building a bunch of mobile experiences together and doing some large-scale art creative projects. But there's engineers, scientists, social scientists, cognitive scientists, as well as artists there, is we're saying basically, how do we evaluate collaboration? What are methodologies that make sense? And how do we understand beauty and aesthetics? What are social aesthetics? What is it when everybody contributes to the process as opposed to just one individual? And how do we understand when that's valuable, and how is that meaningful, and what are the how do we judge that? So we're going to be tackling this for 4 days together in Banff, and I think that will be kind of interesting and fun. And I'm going to make some comments about what I think about that. And this is what Victoria and Jim and I were meeting about today. So this is an event that's going to bring together people who work within really sort of basic nanotechnology research stuff, like hardcore nanotechnology research, in the top institutes in the world, hopefully, if our plots, are going to actually be manifest from today's planning meeting. And two of the both the UCLA group is involved, but also the really critical new research institute in Canada is part of this as well, with science fiction writers, artists, designers, people working in visualization, to start to kind of think through, to start at this very, very early phase, how can we imagine the kind of cultural outputs of nanotechnology? How can we imagine what we want scientists to create in this world? How can we actually really begin to work together at this early stage, as people actually sort of did with virtual reality work and, what's now called ICT, way back in the 60s and 70s, which we're now seeing results from, some of which are very culturally fulfilling, others of which are not so. So that's another example of one of the summits that we have, and we've sort of figured out this sort of peculiar way of getting people to talk to each other. Some of which definitely has a lot to do with trying to work out kind of issues and contexts and questions of language, and to kind of find the terms that we all are working with within our knowledge domains, and to kind of make those present, and then to define them and negotiate them together so we can actually have a conjoined terminology around some of what we're talking about and debating. And the second thing that we've been really kind of militant about at Banff, which is uncomfortable for some people, is to place both science and art and design within a larger social context. So to kind of create these kind of context-driven dialogues where you're not always like off focus, sort of saying, well, what's the meaning of this in a social context? But where at least the discourse is contextualized, and you look at implications as well as ideas, and where people also have to kind of own the context of where their ideas and theory is generated from. And that's been like incredibly successful, and a bit of an aha situation to some extent for some of the people from the science communities that we work with, because there isn't a lot of support in doing that always. And then for artists too, artists have been forced time and again to step away from "we are victimized by science," because that tends to be, artists tend to take this position where they'll say, I don't have access to resources, or scientists, have too much power and money, or, we want to work on this, but you won't let us. And they're in a situation where it's just not the situation. All of the scientists there are there because there's a will to work with artists and understand our practice, and to understand what designers do. And all of the artists are there suddenly often confronted with the reality of scientists who are open to navigating the space of true collaboration. So that's really interesting. And then you have this huge problem around literacy, which is that artists have very deep literacy within theory. We're heavily theorized, and we tend to talk in theoretical structures and meta-concepts. And so there's that happening on one hand, and then scientists are often very deeply embedded within their discipline, and getting people to kind of step back and find a way of popularizing their ideas and their concepts has been really important, and then to move away from that sort of space of popularization to being able to set out a problem and look at how you can solve it together. So, and then you actually can start to begin to work together. So what I thought I would do is to talk a little bit about sort of maybe more even philosophically why I do support a sort of non-utopian position on science and art collaboration. Because I think there's been, and you'll see from my own work, there was a lot of hype in the last 5 years towards the end of the millennium about how if art and science could only get together, we'd sort of be in this brave new future together, and it would be just fantastic. And I actually think that it is true that you need cross-disciplinary collaboration to solve a number of key problems. That it's no longer in all domains something that people can do on their own within their discipline. I think you need collaboration to actually produce forms of knowledge that are both at a new level of theorization and also in a very pragmatic sense. So we actually do pragmatically need each other. What I actually don't think we need is necessarily, although sometimes this is what happens, is I don't think we necessarily need to, as an artist, become a scientist, or as a scientist become an artist. And I think some of the utopianism, sometimes that's happened, has been this assumption that you have to kind of become each other in terms of your knowledge and your skills. What I do think makes sense in some situations is to be able to actually build a new identity together, which is to say, I have knowledge in a number of domains, you have knowledge in a number of domains. We need to be able to together create this space of really deep exchange, which only happens through spending a lot of time together. And also figuring out ways of constantly, you know, creating actual objectives and goals, identifying those, meeting those, evaluating those, and having evaluation criteria, as they say in the research world, that is both, you know, of value to the artist. So you look at what your artistic output needs to be, of value to the scientist, but are conjoined goals. And that's the space where you actually begin to create this new identity. And that's very interesting. If you look at people who've worked together over extensive periods of time from those disciplines, they actually create a kind of different affective, like emotional space of their collaboration, which kind of suggests this new discipline, which suggests how the collaboration feels, which suggests the kind of aha qualities of new knowledge. And it's actually incredibly engaging, and it's something that takes time and huge amounts of labor and social time together to construct, as well as the kind of discursive intellectual time, and then creating both your inventions that are in your own domains, but this conjoined invention, this other kind of object. And that's a really interesting and exciting sort of moment when you can say, you know, this is what we're going to research together, we're going to create this thing together, and we're each going to be able to describe it from our disciplines. We're going to be able to publish from our disciplines to be like, you know, brutal in an academic sense, but we're also going to start to co-publish, co-describe, and create this other sort of entity. And so that's a little bit of where I see this sort of non-utopian, you know, real pragmatic, hard stuff of collaboration, and where I think that pays off incredibly. Now, some of that happens through pure accident, and of course the internet is the great thing that everyone talks about as being, you know, people repurposing, you know, DARPA technology in another kind of way. But I actually have seen, through artists and scientists being in a shared space, inventions happen that are just really smart and exciting that would not happen if they didn't share this sort of literally sometimes physical space and sometimes network space together. So I'm just going to show you, there's a project that I've been involved with. There's a couple of projects that I'm involved with right now that are sort of interesting in the sense that they have a lot of challenges involved with them. Yeah, here we go. So this project is called Westgrid. And Westgrid is a sort of absolutely major project that is pulls together high-performance computing capabilities in a grid network across basically Western Canada. And so the people who are involved in it are scientists who work in earth sciences and physicists, mathematicians, and it's a $40 million project, so it's a pretty big project. And in the midst of that project are a group of us whose skill set is in collaboration methodologies and processes, building tools for collaboration over video, and then really, really new level invention around visualization. So that's like immersive experience and how to express data in ways that are meaningful to cross-disciplinary science. And interestingly enough, Banff has sort of ended up as being a kind of fulcrum organization in the midst of this, where we're building one of the largest labs for the entire network, and where our job is actually to try and figure out how to make scientific visualization meaningful across a number of disciplines as designers and artists. And we're actually taking a lot of the knowledge that we have within our creative environment, and we're kind of placing it within this science environment where, frankly, scientists have, have built these grid systems, but the tools they have for collaboration are often phenomenally non-communicative, and their ability to communicate with each other tends to be pretty idiosyncratic and quirky, and we're trying to find ways to actually really facilitate dialogue through social process and through design aesthetics and through making it pleasurable and valuable and through really checking out how to make visualizations meaningful. So it's a really interesting kind of role for us to be in as cultural researchers, and it's taken a year of this project. Like, we were invited in, I think partly because it was seen as a kind of sexy thing to kind of have cultural researchers as part of this. And we were invited in, and then we sort of faced this wall of hostility, to be honest about it, where it was like, well, God, now you're here and you're actually going to do something. And we've now been at the point where I've recently rewritten the research framework to make it make sense, because it was all written from, we're going to develop, touch-based whiteboard technologies. We're going to develop these new 3D presentation spaces. We're going to develop this high broadband gigapop network. And it was just like, great, those are really good tools. Now, what are the interfaces between those technologies and the researchers? How do you create applications that make sense? What does a biologist need to see, and a chemist and a physicist, if they're working on the same problem? And how can you layer that visualization in a way where they can understand each other's research? So it's been very interesting to start to kind of step into that environment and to say, no question that there's added value to our role within that research environment, because those three forms of science have to talk to each other. They have to talk to each other in order to solve problems. And we are the people who kind of know how to talk to other people, because we're artists and designers, and our job, that's our bread and butter, is communication, right? And our bread and butter is also aesthetics, so it's just been that's been a really interesting project, and stay tuned on that one, because that's cool, that's very exciting. The other project that's ongoing now at Banff, and I don't have a website to show you, but I will soon, is a project which is called it's the Socially Adept Technology Project. And I'm going to just read you some of this because it's a framework for the collaboration. And that's been a really, really, at first, incredibly painful project to put together, which I have to say that in general, my experience from the cultural sector beginning to work with hard science and then with kind of new media industries is that it can be very clunky, and then there's just this point where you just get passionately excited about the energy that's happening, and then it goes, and it goes well. But you have to constantly check each other, and you have to constantly make stuff. You have to get into the nitty-gritty of making things and feel that reward of having to work out problems that you solve. So this project is, I decided that I would court this laboratory system in Canada, which is called TR Labs, Technology Research Labs. And they're a really heavy-duty research environment in Canada. They're public sector, and they have private sector partners. They're basically the people who figured out all of the infrastructure that was Nortel and all that kind of stuff. Again, before the collapse, they did a lot of communication system stuff. They're now heavy into medical research. They're into genomics. They're into all this stuff. And they're well-funded, and they're based in universities, and they have their own labs. And I just thought, wouldn't it be great if they built a lab at the Banff Centre that was a conjoined artistic and science research lab that brought all of those resources, and they've got company partnerships like Microsoft, blah, 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 up the yin-yang. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to kind of have that at the Banff Centre and to be part of their research network, because they actually are able to attract some of the best researchers in Canada. So it's taken 5 years to get to the point where we're now, over the last year, over a series of consistent meetings, ourselves, the entire TR Labs network, and now all their heavy hitters as researchers sit at the table, like their biomedical researchers, their genomics people, their computer science people. They do some of the best work in AI in the world. Me and my team at Banff, we're the only women ever at this table, and that may have to do with why there is such interest in this, research network, but whatever. And then NUMIC, which is a center out in BC that does basically commercially based research with games industry and so on, has some of the same partners we have, because we work with similar partnerships, but Banff has been able to do creative, really like not industry-driven outcome research, and NUMIC is the other way. So we're all getting married. In fact, we're having this sort of complex threesome, and it's been a really great process putting that together, because we've hit this aha phase where we have like 5 themes of research, well 4 now. One is collaborative methodologies and the tools and means to do that. We're looking at advanced visualization, including things like really beautiful tabletop visualization environments, and just a lot of stuff that's quite interesting and beautifully designed. They're leaders in agent technology, so we're about to take off into looking at how you use AI in ways that are subtle and socially appropriate. And they have one of the best wireless research environments in the world. So we are actually putting together this research network, and a lot of our interest in it is how to figure out how to work together effectively. So what will come out of that, the outcome hopefully, are sort of really refined methodologies about how to bring together these forms of intellectual knowledge. And we are bringing ethnographers and sociologists and psychologists into the mix too. So it's social science and humanities as well as arts. And they're very excited because I've proposed that we put artists within their labs. So they have like 8 labs in Canada, and there's going to be artist and residency programs in those labs now. And the role of the artists in the residency programs is to make trouble. And so a lot of the other research is quite thematically driven, but the artist in residency program is very specific. It's to take the technologies these guys are developing and let artists loose on them without an agenda, to basically go, well, what can we do with this? How can we reimagine this? So I think that'll be quite exciting. And I'll just read this piece because I think it just sort of ties up a little bit of what the goals are. And then I'm going to move on to some of the more fun stuff of collaborations that we're doing at the Banff Center and stuff in the artistic realm, and then the CodeZebra project. So what we've said here is the ability to communicate effectively in order to collaborate towards common as well as individual objectives is a primary social, scientific, cultural, economic, and political necessity. Collaboration needs to cross knowledge domains and cultures, local, disciplinary, and global. It requires shared vocabulary and eventually identification within the group. That's a sort of straightforward way of saying what I said in a more abstract way before. Collaboration engages language and rationality, but also cognitive and sensory perception and the creation of trust. And this is stuff that like these science guys are actually buying into, so I think that's great. Collaboration can support short and long-term goals. It can occur around a common project with diverse objectives for each collaborator. It can occur around a long-term project that results in a merged identity and fully twined objectives, creating new disciplines and knowledge, or it can achieve both shared outcomes and effective differentiated outcomes for science and cultural researchers, for example. New media research, however, demands collaboration between artists, scientists, computer scientists, engineers, designers, and social scientists. This sense of overlapping circles of knowledge should result in a densely layered central core, as well as healthy spaces of contribution. The socially adept technology project is a crucible in which to generate and formalize collaboration methods and outcomes. Each participating organization has a proven track record in collaboration that will amortize through this association. We will research and develop protocols, processes, infrastructures, methodologies, tools, blah, blah. Okay. The project will continue the tradition of intensive research and development think tanks and facilitated fast prototyping workshops that has gained an international reputation for the Banff Media Institute. So one of the things we do a lot at Banff is when we have ideas, we try and create design documents quickly and fast prototype. And that, I think, is really attractive in terms of the art and science collaboration process. We will develop a self-study environment using ethnography and other approaches to the developing collaboration. It structures knowledge, outcomes, and development. And then we talk about training emerging researchers and collaboration skills. And we talk about the inequity between scientists and artists in terms of kind of power relationships in putting this project together, and how this is a kind of environment where we can level the playing field there. So that's the project, and just to give you, like, very quickly, some of the things that we're going to do within it, only in the collaboration area, because there's all these other pieces like health research and so on, but we're creating data visualizations between math, science, and language researchers and artist designers and technicians. We're doing a large comparative project on how to visualize human dialogue over networks, and I'll show you some of my work there. And we're creating what we've called physical interfaces for emotional collaboration, and those are readable, wearable technologies. So that's sort of fashion design and usable mobile devices that have a kind of aesthetic and functional component to them. We're doing a project called World Pulse, which is an ecological exploration, and the science part is geographic, ageographic mobile technologies, and the content is how you create play and learning experiences using ecological kind of crisis issues over large-scale collaborations in different time zones. And then finally, we're developing a set of collaboration tools, which we've been kind of working on. So physical interfaces like these beautiful tables and visualization tools. And we've begun to work with what we've called accessible collaboration technologies with disabled people to provide ways of creating other sensory experiences in the collaboration environment. So I'm really excited that, we're going to be doing that work. And I think it's, intensive, long-term, hard work, and I'm sure there'll be many fights along the way, but it's been amazing to me how in the last year, since we've really started to kind of talk about our own research together as researchers, the level of excitement and the ability to actually really understand what each other is doing has been really high. So I'm now going to take you to Horizon Zero, and this is so Horizon Zero is a collaborative project that is a multi-million-dollar project at the Banff Center. It basically was an idea I had about 2.5 years ago, which is I thought it would be really, really fantastic to basically build an environment that was a commissioning space and a publication space, a space of kind of critical theory, but also an actual space to place new media work that was commissioned, that would also interpret or reinterpret the work of artists who worked in installation-based new media or architecture, scientific visualization, mobile technologies, tactile environments, all the kind of stuff people work in, but to find a really strong place to work with that within the internet as a space. And to have a kind of range of activity within Horizon Zero, which was to both have this kind of space of critical theory and publication, kind of traditional web-based publication that is not that interactive, but hopefully was beautifully designed, to these artist commissions and kind of reworking of projects, to comments by scientists as well as people at times from the kind of cultural industry sector, right through to what we've called Zero Horizon, which is a place where people can kind of take the objects, the digital objects that we create, and rework them, and also contribute their own material to that space, and have a series of toys and games that they can play with and engage with, and kind of work with the database in a really kind of active way. So figuring out how much it would cost to do that, I thought we needed several $1 million. And I went to the federal government in Canada at the time, which was really trying to sort of, the Canadian government is pretty good at cultural funding, and they're also very aware of the need to kind of create a context for cultural discourse using the internet. And we're heavily networked in Canada, like much more than the US, with a lot of government infrastructure. So I just sort of seized the opportunity, and I went to the federal government, and I basically pitched this idea about 2 years ago, and they gave me the money to do it. And then, it's one of those things where you kind of have this one paragraph that you sort of raise all this money around, and then you have to go like, oh my God, this is like a massive collaborative enterprise. Like, this is a really big deal. I promised them a few things. One, we would publish every month. It would be completely bilingual. Canada's a bilingual country. It would have very strong Aboriginal representation at time in Aboriginal languages. It would cover the spectrum that I've described, and that we would do fundamental research in it on, internet technologies. So, stepping back and going, and so then I wrote a business plan for it, a design document, and we had to kind of then promise to make it accessible to disabled people eventually, and we had to also make it available on the government portal that they were launching. So then I wrote all the specs, the design document, wrote the whole framework, thought out 40 issues for it, of themes, came up with names of writers and artists, and did a lot of this in a brainstorm with a couple of key people. Kind of had the framework, so it is my idea. I'm the big kind of person who came up with it. But it was very clear to me that this was just something that was not going to be my thing. It was very much about engaging an incredible team of people to work with. And also, the idea was also not just to make it Canadian, but to have a sort of international dialogue around these questions and issues. So it's been incredibly fun to do. It's been possible to do, which is what's been absolutely amazing, is that we've kind of pulled this thing off, where we've done, in the beginning, the first year we did single issues, and I'll take you actually through a little bit of it. I just want to say we've just launched Remix yesterday, and Remix is basically about remix culture, so it's very much about all the questions of sort of file sharing, transformation, VJ, DJ culture. We've worked with an incredibly talented group of artists and musicians and VJs and DJs from across North America, mostly with some British input. And the way that the issue works, it's basically, now our issues span 2 months, because we were just finding it really difficult to deal with one question in 1 month. So what we're doing now, which has been equally hard work, is we're taking like a theme or a question, but we now publish sometimes weekly within that, and sometimes 1 month part 1 and 1 month part 2, so we kind of go deeper. And what we've done with this issue, just to take you a little bit through it, is it kind of gives you, this is a bit of an overview of what we're doing with it. But what there are is, there's these sort of battles, which is kind of, we sort of thought it was a sort of interesting moment to have some battles around imagery. So there you go, that's the first kickoff. And that image then is reworked by a number of artists who come in over the 8 weeks of the publication, and they take that image, they take Carol's image, and they add things to it, and they transform it. And so that's hers, and let me just get back into the Remix interface. I just want to show you the next image. Whoops, sorry. So that's how that's been reworked, and I've actually had the privilege of seeing where some of the images are going, and they're very cool. And then we did the same thing with music, which is here. Excuse me. Hello. So Cold Cut launched it, and sorry, I should probably bring the volume up.
Sarah, are these invited artists?
Yeah.
And then they get the infrastructure, the FTP, and pull it out.
Yeah. So this is just to give you a sample of what this issue is like, and then I'll tell you about how we kind of created it. And so Cold Cut started. Martin took his music and worked with Shane Breaker, who's a phenomenal Aboriginal artist who does tons of DJ stuff. Started all kinds of internet radio. Is next. Susan Kennard is next. Blah blah. So it goes on, and so basically you have access to all this remixed music there. And then there's also Johan Gingras, who's a really wonderful new media artist, basically has created this large-scale game experience, which is about to launch next week, that people can play within the environment. And then there's also within it a discourse space where there's essays, dialogues about kind of key questions in remix culture, and a lot of that's highly interactive. So DJ Spooky is writing for us. There's a sort of whole history of the DJ scene in Quebec, which is a big international export scene. So that's an example of that issue as it's just emerging. What I want to do is just show you a little bit of what we've done with some of the other issues, which were increasingly based on these sort of artist commissions. So this is a specific artist who has done a lot of work about kind of questions about alienation and home, and questions about sort of race and difference, and all of these are thematics that are explored within the kind of dialogue space. And let me just get into here, just to sort of see, so you can see some pieces of it. This is a poem that kind of launches the site. Each of the petals becomes another response to the poem. There are diarists who kept a daily diary that was launched on the site in response to the poem. There were like, share was a space where people could contribute their stories to it. So it's become a kind of very rich environment in many, many ways. And I just want to show you a couple of other things here. Part two were sort of articles and interviews with people who were, which I'm now losing, sorry. Here. Okay, there, great. So this is an example of one of the articles that we commissioned. Just to kind of click around in here. Nella Hopkinson's a science fiction writer, so she wrote this quite beautiful story about a tree and its transformation. There's also in each issue, I'll just go to C right now, in each issue there's also an editorial that I write the sort of meta-editorial, which is a sort of theory text. Martha Ladley, who's the artistic director, writes kind of her perspective. So let me just get in here. Oh, sorry. Okay, there we go. So this is my text that I write that sort of tends to be sort of theory. I mean, it's a kind of vision of what the kind of questions are. This is actually about the scientific theory of quintessence and how to kind of think about that in terms of visualization. Martha's text tends to be far more pragmatic, and hers is called Sub Rosa. Oops. Charged Heart is a commissioned piece about Catherine Richards, who's an artist who's done a great deal of work in visualization, and it really does absolutely beautiful work as an artist. In the art side here, there's also, in science, sorry, I'll take you there. This is quite an interesting piece about the tensions between art and design in presenting scientific visualization and data. So these are all kind of interpretations of the same image using kind of color theory, and the designer who wrote about it is actually an astrophysicist who's also a designer, and she was sort of looking at the kind of problems about which community you're speaking to and their expectations of how they want to see data represented. So that's an example of that one. Eat is an issue, and I'm going to tell you about how it was produced and how we worked together after I take you through a few of these. Yeah. So this was our holiday issue, and this is me welcoming people into my house, and I hostessed a party. And this party basically featured artists and some artist couples from basically sea to shining sea in Canada, all of whom were responsible for providing a component of the menu. And so it could be turkey, which was something that Jason Lewis and Scolinati Fragnito created. It's an extremely funny piece. It's all about turkey as data and eating data. It's quite clever. This is tiramisu, and Sherry D is a performance artist. I actually went on the perfect tiramisu hunt. So we went to almost every Italian restaurant in Calgary trying to find the perfect tiramisu until we were near death. And then we got the recipes, so this is all about that process. It's quite funny. Yeah, some of it, and it was pain and it was pleasure.
It's a Sarah.
So Bruno is a fantastic restaurateur and also runs SAT, which is this Art and Technology Center in Montreal, and he actually has a fantastic restaurant. And so he kind of knows how to do both things, and this is about Bruno's couscous and where to find the ingredients and all that kind of stuff. So anyhow, we each contributed pieces of it. Martha and I co-hosted. The other thing we did for EAT, which was like completely crazy and fun, is that we held on Solstice an iVisit real-time party, which went for 6 hours, and people booked in from all over the world, and I mixed martinis, and Martha tried to keep me standing up, and we co-hosted it, and we had just a really great time, and people actually had their own parties and participated, so that was just, that was fun. And just to take you back through some of the other issues, touch is about intimacy and touch and tactility and the kind of problems of private and public space. And I should just say something about this interface, which was in some ways a really nice idea and a good intuitive idea, and as you can see, and I'm like the editor-in-chief, it's hard to negotiate. So we're just redesigning it. So we're actually going to have more of a sort of traditional web homepage where you can choose the issue and then navigate this way through each issue. But transference is interesting here because that's one where Lynn Sutherland, who's one of the lead scientific researchers in wireless in Canada, writes this whole kind of visionary piece about where she wants mobile technologies to go. And what was really neat about this is a woman who has not had an opportunity to do a visionary piece, and we gave her the opportunity to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'll pull up something kind of pretty here, hopefully, and I'll tell you a little bit about the team and how it works and how we're able to put it together. Body Maps is a piece by Tekla Shiphorst, who's a wonderful artist who created this physical installation where you touch this velvet covered table, and it switches video images and sound images of herself and her son under kind of water and leaves. And so this is an example where we kind of redesigned the piece and really tried to make the mouse movement kind of echo what the hand stroking is within the actual installation space. So basically Horizon Zero has myself in my role, which is to kind of try and kind of think out a framework of issues, of concepts that I think we should explore, and a little bit of who to feature within that. And then Martha Ladley, who used to run interactive media at Real World in the UK with Peter Gabriel, and who I was able to kind of grab as my artistic director, so that's fantastic. And she's really talented, visionary, really good, though, in facilitating other people's creativity, because that's what this publication is about. It's not about my creativity or Martha's, except at this meta level. It's very much about our design team and the artists we work with, the writers we work with. And Martha's used to production output, so she can put something out every month, and that's a big deal. Like, that's hard to do at this level. And then we had a lead designer for a while, and then actually Martha took that on too, because she teaches design. She's super knowledgeable about design. And then we have two junior designers who are people who had come out of this kind of environment, basically, who we were really thrilled to be able to hire. One who's really, really great at interactive design, and the other's a fantastic graphic artist, and they're actually on our staff, they're on our team. And there's two intern work studies who work with them. We have an English language editor, Angus Leach, who's very good editor, and I've just seen him get better and better as we've gone through the project. So he works with the writers. He also, with Sylve Perron, who is our French editor, comes up with a précis after brainstorming with Martha and I of what each issue should be, and then we figure out which writers, which artists, what treatments, how we're going to redesign, who we're going to commission. But Angus and Sylvie work with the artists. And then there's a woman named Sandra DeMetto, who has just come on as our producer. We had a wonderful producer, Justine Bizocchi, for the first year, who was like a great mother to everybody, and her mother-in-law got sick, so she had to leave. So we've got a new producer who, interestingly, comes much more from industry. And it's, in a way, Justine was a great first-year producer, and now we have this person who just drives us, and it's great, because she's someone who's like, you know, we're going to get the schedule met. And then we have a whole core of people who are writers and are artists, and with each issue there's a core of writers, but the writers change and the artists always change. And then we have outside design consultants. And then we have this really fantastic woman, Lisa Betterton, who came out of sort of Java and interactive design, and she's just turned out to be phenomenal at sort of technical direction. And she's just kind of working out both all the really tough database and interactive stuff for the Zero Horizon site, but she solves our technical problems, and we're about to hire another technical consultant. So it's an 8-person staff, you know, and we work pretty hard. They work pretty hard. And the process, though, is really great because we have these editorial meetings once a week where we brainstorm and we talk about questions and we make decisions. People go and they get their stuff and they kind of work it through on a weekly schedule. And basically, Martha does a lot of work with the artists and with the designers on a day-to-day level. And then I see things when they're in draft form, and I sign off on them, I comment on them. And then basically, Martha and I basically sign off on everything. So it's a collaboration with a hierarchy, but a really functional hierarchy, and people love it. They love working on this thing. And we also have a research work study who is about to come on, who kind of researches all of the back stuff. And we've now got enough money to hire basically an interactive technology work study who's going to work on the gaming environment. So it's a big project, but it's been really interesting to see how we've been able to make it work really, really smoothly together. Interestingly enough, for the first 2 issues, I hired a very autorial artistic director, and those issues are great, but they're completely based on the things that he was interested in. And Daniel Canty, very talented writer, but you know what? He wrote everything. He designed everything. And the team didn't feel any identification at all with the publication, and we're constantly missing deadlines, and it was just really hard to do. So bringing in people who are used to working collaboratively or would learn to work collaboratively was just a really, really important kind of process. And Daniel is very sort of text-oriented, so this is sort of, you know, a very text-based environment that was really great. It's a very good issue, but it's a really different approach. So that's that. The next thing I want to talk about is the kind of current status of CodeZebra. And CodeZebra is a project that some of you have probably heard me talk about before. So I want to be sort of careful about like not repeating everything that you've heard. But it's a project that's now at another level in terms of its realization. So I've been working on CodeZebra for a while. It's a chat environment that facilitates dialogue between different disciplines. It helps collaboration in the sense that it kind of does a kind of emotional tracking of ideas and concepts. I'll show you the current prototype, which came from the Deaf Festival, and then I'm going to kind of back out of this a little bit and tell you a little bit about the experience at that festival, what I did, and show you a little bit of a clip from the programmers and designers who I worked with to kind of get stuff ready for the festival, and I'm going to show you some of the process at the festival. So it just takes a little while to load, and we're now in our sort of 3rd version of prototype of this project. It's a project that's challenging in the sense that the idea is to try and visualize the ways that humans communicate in conversations, and to do that in a way where you can kind of figure out how it works without having an instruction handbook, and where you can use it as a sort of creative and design space. It has a sort of bimorphic aesthetic to it, which this is the current stage of the aesthetics, and there's lots of compromises in this in order to make this work fast over networks, because it's Java-based, and we had big speed problems with the second prototype, which was incredibly gorgeous, but which you'll see in the videotape, but just couldn't work fast enough for people to use. Each of these spaces represents a conversation topic. So people are actually, this is actually from the Deaf Festival, where people are talking about different kinds of issues. And so, for example, there's a debate on mobility and identity. There's a discussion here about what people hope to have happen at the festival. This is a discussion about time and space. this is a discussion that happens at 9:30 and where people are sort of talking about 9:30 a.m., which I'll explain why that's relevant later on. And so when this wakes up, which it's slowly doing, you can actually see all of the topics that are within the space of a conversation. And this area here is basically, this gives you different perspectives. So this allows you to kind of flip the topics back and sort of see them in relation to each other. This allows you to zoom in, and zooming in can be worthwhile because you then start to get these really detailed images, and each of these represents a posting actually. And each posting has a subject to it, which you can open up. And in this instance, people were talking about time and space and debating time, space, synthesis, and the uncertainty principle. So there's a kind of conversation here that you can follow in part by looking at the links between each of these postings. So each posting has been posted to, and so this lattice shows you that. So it's quite fascinating to kind of see what the relationships are between different ideas as you open them and as you mouse over, and just see the topic headings. And you can also see this is the first posting within that dialogue. So somebody's kicking open the discussion of time and space. And in this case, it's two researchers who are spending 24 hours together, and these are the questions that they're going to look at over a 24-hour period. So they've got 11 segments of time that they've created to discuss topics, and they're going to summarize. I'll just zoom out again so you get some sense of this. So each of these, as I said, has a kind of topic area. Each of these are postings. We have been working on an AI system which generates this particular pattern or that pattern, and that AI system is an analysis of things that we thought we could measure that give you an emotional reading for how people chat to each other within an online environment. So that's a butterfly posting, and it represents kind of ideas that are kind of thrown down quickly within this space. And there's a giraffe posting here. This is actually supposed to be a little leopard. So they're all different identities which over time, through the way you post, you would be able to kind of figure out how you were generating a specific kind of visual graphic for a posting style, and you could either change that, or you would also know that you had these tendencies. That's a peacock, for example. So we've sort of used this sort of bimorphic patterning to give a sense of not so much fixed avatar identities, but more sort of style of a kind of emotional style. Within this area here, these are games that people can access which allow them to basically play either alone or against each other, and they're all language games. So the stress relief game, which is, I have to actually open, here we go. I'll show you this one because I really like it. I like them all, but this is one of my favorites. I wonder why. So the stress relief game, the games were actually built in Director, and some of them are built in Flash. And come on, hello. Just takes a little while for it to open. There we go. So there you go. So here we have something I just posted. And you can just play with it. If you want to play aggressively, you can do this kind of stuff. So I had this idea that because I do a lot of work with language games at the Banff Center when I'm working with artists and scientists, and some of them are sort of like on-site experiences a little bit like this, of mixing up language, trying to come up with new terms. So the idea I had was if we could actually create a visualization that would sort of play with language, then you know, you can always sort of go back to the source of what you had, but it kind of gives you the ability to sort of see language as something that's malleable, transformable. So you can see that a little bit. Scrunch is pretty cute here too. Okay, so So CodeZebra has this games environment that also runs in it, and it has this posting environment which over time you actually can begin to learn to read it and understand the relationships between concepts as they're emerging within the space. So that's sort of where the software is at this point in time. What I did in Rotterdam was I had this idea for a long time of doing kind of intellectual multiplayer reality television. And so what I wanted to do was to take artists and scientists and create this really, really sort of intensive collaboration laboratory with them where I locked them up together and asked them over a 24-hour period. At first I was going to do 48 hours, but I actually decided that that was too long. None of these people knew each other. I had to curate them, so I had to pick them. I wanted it to actually follow the 24-hour body cycle because I thought it would be really interesting to kind of use, in a way, a sort of natural cycle as a sort of framework, and I thought it would be generative. So my idea was to lock them up together in a space that was quite kind of beautiful. The space in DEF was decorated with a lot of this sort of stuff, and to give them whatever they requested in terms of things to consume. So basically, each group, because I did 2 groups at DEF, they wanted really good scotch. So I got them really good scotch. Absinthe through one group, had to smuggle it into the Netherlands. And then they got to go shopping and buy their own food. So that was their first point of contact, was actually shopping together for food and figuring out what they'd eat. They had separate beds, they had a workspace, they had very comfortable sort of couch and lounge space, and they had this large dining room area where they could kind of sit. They were locked up in this place called the Parasite, which was on top of the place where the Deaf Festival was, which was this 3-story architect-designed kind of little house that looked out over the harbor, and there was a huge deck where people could kind of stand, they could stand and look out over the harbor, so they had this amazing view of the city of Rotterdam. So it was both kind of luxurious, but also they were locked in there. They had all manner of surveillance technology, so they had cameras that were watching them for 24 hours. They had CodeZebra, which they could use as a chat environment to talk to each other and to the outside world. And they were streaming over the internet for the entire time that they were locked up. And then I was downstairs in a control room that was within the actual festival installation space. And I had an installation of fabrics and materials that had been made through the CodeZebra patterns and printing process, kind of almost like a second-hand store. And clothing, and then these big spaces where people could lounge, and you could see the people who were locked up through the video stream. And you could also hear them, and you could talk to them because we had two-way communication from downstairs, and you could also chat with them on the software. And the streams went out also over the website at DEF and CodeZebra, and people could participate by chatting. There were moderators who were with us on site for about 3 hours, every 2 or 3 hours. So whatever the process was with the people who were upstairs was mediated by people who had expertise in a specific area of relevance to their conversation. So Tom Donaldson and Mary Flanagan were locked up together. Mary's a game designer and an artist, and she's done a lot of work with complexity theory. And Tom Donaldson is an inventor and an engineer, and he's created personal kind of AI tracking software environments. He does a lot of work with smart materials. And I wanted them to kind of talk about questions of intelligence, of trust, of how to understand time and space and kind of phase theory, and to kind of look at a number of questions, the potential sort of for mutual invention. And I asked them to come up with a number of inventions from the time that they spent together. The first group were Paul Wang, who's a video artist from Vancouver, who's done a lot of work where he's locked himself into spaces, so he's kind of used to being locked up. And he did a really beautiful piece in the late 70s when a friend of his committed suicide, where he hung in a cage inside a gallery and just smashed the cage back and forth, like swung continually for 24 hours. So I thought if he could do that then, he could certainly handle being locked up, you know, in this millennium. And he's done a lot of work with surveillance technologies as well. And then Nina Wakeford, who's a really brilliant ethnographer who runs a research center in England, which basically looks at the ethnography of contemporary technologies. But she's never done any self-study, so she's always studied other people. So I locked Paul and Nina up together because I thought it would be really interesting in terms of them having to invent. And they've both done a lot of work about sort of sexuality and desire and the kind of technology and apparatus of sexuality over networks and sort of in situ. So I asked them to kind of look at intimacy and desire and surveillance and to also look at the problem of performance and this sort of 24/7 process that they were part of. So they were much more engaged with kind of looking at the context. And Tom and Mary were much more engaged with actually inventing stuff. And I would say that it was amazingly successful in the sense that both pairs came up with phenomenally strong images, knowledge, quality work, you know, fantastic quality work. I had a camera crew from the BBC who went up basically every 3 or 4 hours and did an interview with them to see how they were doing and to kind of get a sense of presence. And they were also given video cameras where they were asked to do video diaries and sort of testify, you know, face to face with their audience who were watching them about what their experience was. And that was really amazing for both Paul and Nina because Paul is a video artist and Nina is an ethnographer, so their video diaries are incredibly rich, like amazing. And Nina at one point became very sort of artistically engaged and Paul became very ethnographic and was sort of, you know, so they kind of switched roles halfway through. And with Tom and Mary, but they were very good at sort of staying in separate spaces, but they really collaborated in a really interesting way, and they were very communicative with the outside world. With Tom and Mary, who were super intense, and you'll see a clip from them in a moment, really, really intense together, they sort of bonded against the outside world, and they would sort of, there was this incredible moment when I had the camera on me, because I stayed with them for the 24 hours, and I didn't sleep, but I kind of lay down on this cushion, put the camera on me, and kind of closed my eyes, and I could hear them say, oh, look, she's sleeping. Let's talk about this and this and this. So these are people who are streaming over the internet, right, with like people all over the world watching them, and their ringmaster falls asleep. Their Uber mother, and they suddenly start talking about the things they're going to invent that I won't know about. Well, I wasn't really sleeping. You know, I was sort of like listening, and it was really funny. It was just this sort of brilliant moment of laughs where it's like, hi guys, everyone else is still here and it's all being documented because we're archiving everything, right? So that was just a really interesting kind of moment where there was this sort of resistance. The other thing that was really fantastic that happened was that I hadn't known that this would be the case, but there were huge technology problems with this space that we were in and way less bandwidth than we were supposed to have. So instead of having like close to 1 gigabyte, which had been sort of promised by the Dutch Telco, we had like, you know, almost 156. No, we had 4Ks. And so there just wasn't very much bandwidth. And so what it meant was, at best, there was a 20-second lag between what was said upstairs and what was responded to downstairs. So what that meant was that there was always, I'll just click around in here as I talk. There was always this lag between communication, which meant that people upstairs could be kind of thinking through what they were going to say in the future, and they would just be hearing my questions. So they'd be speaking, and there'd be like our response, and then they'd be responding, and we'd be responding. And so there was a way where we began to inhabit the past, the present, and the future together. And that was really interesting, and we talked about that a lot because it meant that people were kind of working at 3 times the kind of synapse process. Like the kind of cognitive processing was 3 times normal time because we were working in such a simultaneous way. And so the level of kind of energy was just, you know, phenomenal. And the ability to kind of comment upon, think through, and speak out at the same time. So the discourse was almost in the back of your head all the time. Anyhow, it was just a very interesting process. And what I'm going to do is, yeah. Yeah, I'm going to show the video clip. So I'll get out of here, and I'm going to introduce you to Mary and Tom. So there you go. So this is, they've been locked up for quite a while at this point.
Is there any sound?
Yeah, there should be sound.
So you did one final interview with us?
I think the dancing's covered it.
Oh, good.
I think
Didn't the last night group dance? Didn't the last
cool.
night group dance?
Danger, but I think it's quite easy to, look at many different texts and kind of analogize them into a complex system. I mean, one of my favorite books in this regard is Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, which I think of as the perfect fractal book. If you plot the sort of associations against distance away with which it's associated, it's almost like a perfect fractal, one of graph curve. Lots of local associations, but lots of threads, kind of like really quite structured in the way that it brings out, and it's very easy to look at that in hindsight and say, well, that's a very classically complex, classically chaotic system. You could do the statistics and probably find that it fits a good 1 over f, and then it's fractal structured.
But how useful is that?
But I think that's a really big question of complexity that to me.
So Nat Mueller, who's one of the moderators, is coming up to meet them after her time online.
Wow. Hi, I'm Mary. Good to meet you. Nice to meet you. Wonderful to meet you. Well, yes. Yeah, it's very nice. So welcome. Welcome to our spot. This is where we are. This is what we do. Here's our topics.
There you go.
Thank you.
This is the scotch.
Cheers. Cheers.
This is the crew. This is their topics that they're discussing, their 11 topics. Nat's been online with them for 3 hours talking about sex toys, technologies, wearables. She works with Xiaojin Wei, and she does big projects with foam.
I was telling Sarah that you don't have this sort of moment that you can first socialize with people. You sort of like start talking to each other, which is very strange. So yeah, and then this time lag, it was like hard to get used to, and it got very much longer towards the end. It took almost like a minute, I think.
Yeah, we were filming the buttons up here.
Okay.
So this is the time lag she's talking about.
We don't want to hear anymore. No, we weren't. It's just nature.
It's complexity.
That's what I'm going for.
Yeah, all right. You sing and I'll jump.
Wait. So you just came up with these topics, sort of.
Well, the topics, jump on the wall and what's there were basically, when we first arrived, it was like, okay, dump all the ideas we came with. We didn't do any planning before we got here, so it was like, just dump the ideas we came with on a piece of paper, just as a sort of get them out of my head, and it's a vague structuring mechanism.
Right, and I think we should do this. The other thing about this is that, you didn't know us, but we didn't know each other either, so that's kind of, we kind of were stuck in the middle of it too, which is good, because that's what it's all about. If we knew each other, it would be different kind of.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'd be more efficient or less, actually.
Don't know.
I don't read it.
A certain thing, evolution to it, it's kind of fun. So yeah, it's.
So I'm gonna just take you forward a little bit here. Hopefully. Okay, here we go. First video diary. Oops.
It's very dark out. I can hear crickets, frogs, and I'm sure I heard an owl. It's tropical, sweating heat here, but it's really quite eerie, Just all the intensity that you just know is just right, just across from you. You just feel you're moments away from a true safari experience. And anyway, I'm very quiet here because I can hear some rustling from over the other side of the room, I'm not quite sure what it is. So yes, we've done quite well actually. A little bit of flagging from me, but only a little bit, nothing too serious. About 10 minutes snooze, kind of like, a bit of drooling, nothing serious. And we had a fantastic little session with, on sort of AI, personalization, intimacy, trust, all that sort of stuff with Steve the man from Canada. We're in a bit more of a kind of like mellow phase here. The energy.
So if you want to read the dialogue on trust systems, it's actually in CodeZebra. And Steve Marsh, who's an AI researcher, major guy, was basically using CodeZebra to debate them about that.
Almost spiritual, but nevertheless really quite rewarding phase. And I think we're going to make it through the night. I have lots of confidence about this. We've got about a third of our time left to go and 2/3 of the topics left that we set for ourselves. So it's going to be a busy finish. And we're just about to do intimacy, which is why I'm curled up with you in this, slightly more personal, less formal way. I hope you approve of our attempts to bring you into the system a little bit closer. So yes, that's where we are. We're at a crucial moment. We're at like the crux. It'll be dawn soon. The birds will be singing. And then it might be too late. Anyway, you can tell by the coherence of my conversation that it's time for Mary.
Can I get you going now?
Yes, you do.
We're just going to keep it rolling.
Yeah, we might as well.
Where's the little reflective dealie?
Reflective dealie.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's 2:30 in the morning, and we've been doing lots of brainstorming. I kind of think that our session probably needs to go for several days in order to get the kind of results we had hoped for in terms of products, but we're getting a lot of great ideas out there. I'm not tired at all. I don't know if it's just a lot of caffeine or if it's just our space or our conversations or what, but I think we're going to go on to intimacy and then talk about code and language, and hopefully there'll be our category humor in there as well. It's fun. Sarah's awake downstairs playing the CodeZebra music, so that's very exciting for us. And our online experiences have been really interesting, great conversations, and I'm not sure if anyone's watching and commenting. There could be lots of lurkers out there, so hopefully they will be ecstatic to contact us soon, because that's the way things go. Thank you. Very lovely, lovely, lovely. All right, so I guess maybe it's time to do our hair like straight up.
Well, it's time to do your hair straight up. I'm not sure mine goes up.
Yeah! Anyway, so very interesting, nice. What else can we talk about? Video diary. What would one say in a video diary? One talks about secrets in diaries, right? So if we have to tell a secret, what would it be? Okay. My secret is this hair. I know where it's from. Video diary, what time is it?
It's 10 past 4.
10 past 4. We talked about intimacy. Oh, wait, I need my microphone. 4:10 in the morning. We just finished intimacy. We're on our way to code. I don't know what else to say. What does a video diary constitute?
You have to pour out your emotional, your feelings. Talk about the problems you're having with Tom. Explain that you're getting through them, and it's all coming together, but you're quite disappointed.
In Tom. No, I think it's really.
So I'll stop there. So they actually invented 5 things, 5 substantive, amazing things by the end of the 24 hours, which are documented in CodeZebra, but also we documented on the server, and they have the documentation of. And so their plan was, coming out of this experience, and these people hadn't known each other at all, is they're actually going to start working together. And one of them is a game technology, and one of them is an audio technology, and the other is a piece of smart furniture, and it kind of goes from there. So, and they weren't just kind of like bad acid flashes, you know what I mean? They were really solid pieces of invention where if you went back at them, you'd go, God, this is great. And so that kind of forced process of collaboration with this whole kind of structure of surveillance around it, I'm very interested in. So that's it.
So my question is from when, as an artist, you watch this big scale project, you feel a little bit intimidated by the magnitude of it, in the sense that you think, yes, in collaboration it's possible to do projects that you will never be able to do by yourself, just because of the amount of people, the hours involved, the money that you need to put into projects. And so for me, my question is, some of those artists that participate in collaborative projects, then they eventually get out when the project is finished, they continue their practice. Does this collaboration has a big impact on the way they work? Usually they try to do other collaborative projects, or they become,
By observation, I think when collaborations are successful for people, it's very addictive. Because there's this way where you get as interested in the process of what you're making and the kind of social process as the actual thing that you're making. So, I think people go back to doing individual work or maybe maintain that, but there's a way where there's a kind of pleasure in actually making collaborations work effectively, and that sense of a kind of merged identity that if it works. If it doesn't work, it propels you away in some ways. So the stakes of making it work are quite high, I think.
Can you talk a little bit about large-scale collaborations, creative collaborations in relation to cultural institutions? So you've mentioned a lot how there's a language gap between artists and scientists, artists, science, humanists, etc. What about the institutional language problem?
Yeah.
How does, just to rephrase it simply, how does a cultural institution that's used to a certain habit, a certain pattern of behavior in relation to the artist respond to a large-scale collaboration where it's not so easily definable in the sense of roles that are played and the list of participants is too huge to put on the wall, etc.?
I think, it's interesting, within each silo, there's all kinds of collaboration that happens. So within theater, we produce opera, major operas, and we write them, create them, commission them, and somehow that's not seen as being as challenging as the new media space. I think because there's a kind of unknown factor that enters there. Within each disciplinary space, collaboration seems to happen well at Banff. Across the different departments, there's a lot of excitement when artists begin to collaborate and then kind of come back with something, but it happens sort of in the bar, in the dining room, and then we get excited about it. I don't think the institution, even though it's so cross-disciplinary, yet knows how to facilitate it. I would say over the number of years I've been at Banff, Banff's gotten better and better at getting very excited about collaborations that come in. In other words, that we commission, that we construct, that take a number of years, and seeing the kind of outcomes. Like, everyone was very skeptical about Horizon Zero. They're impressed by the amount of money attached to it. They couldn't believe the number of staff I thought were necessary, and they were necessary. And so actually having a well-funded, properly staffed creative collaboration that's been really successful, I think has been a really important thing institutionally, because it's actually made people go, oh, this is the way to do this. Because our art-based institutions are so used to going, we can do this for less money, we can do this for less resources. You know, why are you flowing money there? And I actually think that it's a really rare, fantastic opportunity to do something that's not cultural industry-based, where there's the right amount of money. So for any of our research art projects, when we can actually fund them properly and people can be paid to concentrate on them, because you're buying time from people, it's really important. So I see the institution learning to understand that. I also still see real challenges with managing research-based projects within an artistic institution. And some of it is also that universities have a very slow universities are great, but their research is very slow-paced. You know, the research we do at Banff is very fast-paced. And TR Labs is sort of more about industrial outcomes in some ways, so they're closer to us. So that's why I think we can work together, and the institution will feel, Banff feels comfortable with them as a partner, because it's like they have a track record and output on the science side, but it's a real relearning process for sure. And you know, it's taken about 4 or 5 years to really, now I see people going, wow, this is super exciting, because our results are quite good. There's output that wins awards and gets exhibited, and people publish a lot and that kind of thing. So there's proof, but getting there was very hard. Also having the skill set of people who are able to kind of collaborate and pull together the collaborative team, like project managers or producers who have that skill, is like really challenging, and that's